My name's Anthony. I grew up most of my early life in the Moston area of Manchester. Earliest recollections I have was when my grandmother used to take me to watch the steam trains on what used to be called Northampton Road. We used to stand on the bridge at Thorpe Road, which was quite a major centre for trains, through trains, sidings, and wave at the drivers. My family did have a connection with the railways. Two uncles that I never met apparently did work on the railways at Newton Heath. The earliest recollection of the Newton Heath railway sidings was there used to be a turntable there. And I've never seen it in operation, but I do remember it being there because my dad used to take me down to watch football matches at what was Newton Heath Loco, which used to be a ground where teams like Goslings and the high end of the Manchester League teams used to play. In fact, my dad did play for Goslings. He also played for Manchester United Youth and had a spell at Cambridge United and played for the RAF. So he was, in his day, was probably bottom end of semi-professional. Life in Moston was on Hine Street and Bluestone Road area, which are still there at this point in time. Generally, you just playing out on the streets because there was very little else in the area as regards recreation. I went to local school, St Dunstan's, which was just at the bottom end of Bluestone Road. It went down Carter's Fields, over Lightbound Road, and you had Broadhurst Park, which was sort of like an adventure. We moved from Bluestone Road to Moston Lane into a bungalow that was purpose-built by my dad's uncle, who was Dr. Frank Boothroyd, who owned land that used to be part of Lancashire's farm. And when we moved there, the old farm buildings were still there. They've long since gone. All that's left there is a bit of a wall from the original building, which was another bit of an adventure, really, because it actually had grapevines growing in a greenhouse at the side, which later on, when a guy called Jack Appleford took it over, I actually got to see. And to see grapevines in Moston, it was probably one of the few grapevines in Manchester, never mind Moston. So it was a totally different environment. We had fields right opposite us, Broadhurst Fields, and obviously new sets of friends and stuff. I started, obviously, to follow my dad in a way in sport. Most of the time, he used to play on Broadhurst playing fields till it got dark. It was the same, about 10 or 12, maybe 15 people. You all used to turn up and we used to just play football. And at that time, started to watch Manchester City, which I've watched ever since and still do now. And basically, it was the environment was like, you could see the old, where Moston Pit was, across the way, which is now the Mines Estate. We saw most of that being built. I don't remember much about the mine. I do remember that a friend of mine's father used to work there, but that would be in the latter days when it was just winding down. After school, I went to work for Ferranti, doing a 12-month apprenticeship at the training school, which was at Hollinwood, and then you moved on to one of the Ferranti factories in the area, which was generally Moston, or you stayed at the Hollinwood factory. I actually went to the Moston factory to start the next phase of the apprenticeship. I worked on a department that used to be called flyplane, which will mean something to anybody who works at Ferranti's, but will mean nothing to most people. It was a detail fitting wiring department doing Ministry of Defence work on naval gun systems. You also got day release to college, so you did a 4-year City and Guilds, and an extra year. I did an extra year as an advanced certificate. It was quite a big factory, not as big as a Hollinwood factory, which was massive. Outstanding memories of working at the Hollinwood factory was the foundry. And when they were doing the introduction, they took you around the foundry, which was one of the most scariest experiences I've had, because I've only been in that one and I wouldn't really fancy working in one or going in one again. But the colossal size of the Hollinwood factory was the transformer bay, where they used to test the transformers. I was fortunate to see them test one, and it fires like lightning across the room. And it is now the Daily Mirror. And the tall part of the Daily Mirror near Morrison's used to be the test bay. I remember when we lived in the bungalow, it set on fire because you could see the smoke coming up across the back of what was then St Gerard's School. And my dad said, "That's Ferranti." And next minute we heard the fire engines go past. And because they were oil-filled, the transformers, I'm assuming something went wrong and it caught fire. So I suppose quite a dangerous environment. There was a lot of machine shops, paint spraying shops. They did a lot of metering stuff. But Moston was totally different. Moston was sort of based on aircraft equipment. So I started off as I finished my apprenticeship, worked in departments, gyros, accelerometers, which was assembling of instruments. Moved on to promoted as a charge hand. I was a charge hand on electrical assembly department. Then I got a job as a foreman in what was the weapons equipment department, which was manufacturing the JP233 runway disablement system, which was a little explosive device on the end of a parachute that dropped on the runway. And if you tried to pick it up, it basically just blew you to pieces. So I spent about 3 or 4 years doing that. Then I moved on to what was then the state-of-the-art next best thing in telecommunications, which was called zone phone, which was a CT3 system that was based on radio communication between a handset and a static landline at a base station, which was very innovative, and the technology was the forerunner of the mobile networks today. A lot of the actual research and development that was done on that department was sold on, when Ferranti's went into liquidation, to companies who developed it further and then created the mobile network, because the handset was basically the thing where the technology was. I spent about 3.5 years doing that. Because of the situation at Ferranti's when they were involved with a company who, a well-established fact that the company that they went into partnership with had cooked the books, as they say. Right. And because of that, obviously things like zone phone and anything that was classed as R&D was the first thing that they shut down. Right. Basically, the demise of Ferranti's was when I got made redundant, and the first part of the business that went was obviously the research and development and the new business in credit phone, because they didn't have any more money to put into the developments, and obviously because of the nature of that business, it was quite expensive to develop that type of system. And it involved creating a network in and around London first, which was a series of base stations that went in shops. It went into service stations. They got into Woolworths at the time, and other shops and retail businesses. There wasn't enough revenue coming in because there wasn't a lot of base stations out there to allow them to actually become in any form self-sufficient. So they closed that down, and over the years, apart from I think a management buyout of the instrumentation, which I think is still in Oldham, the rest of the company was closed down. The old factory on St Mary's Road is now a housing estate. I don't think there's even anything apart from a wall at the back left of the old Ferranti factory, which I spent 20 years of my life in. life moves on, and after a short period of working on quality at Mather and Platt, or Wormholes as they became, doing goods with inspection on electrical work, I got a job with Ericsson's. Limited knowledge from what I gleaned in Ferranti credit phone actually was one of the main reasons I got the job, because main part of the job was surveying sites for positions for telecom equipment and power and stuff like that on a much larger scale. The theory of doing the job was the same. So it was like a step up into telecommunications and a development in the fact that I was able to do site surveys, having spent 20 years in a factory, but not going anywhere apart from a few site visits and a few visits to suppliers at the very end of the time there on credit phone, to actually be able to go out and do a job where you actually toured the country, you know, doing site surveys at remote places up in Aberdeen and Edinburgh, big city exchanges, was unbelievable. You know, I saw parts of the country that I would never see, or you would never go. Places, little out places, a place called Mousewold and places like that, where, you know, you'd never come across these places out in Dumfries and up in Ayrshire and Scottish Islands. And eventually, as the company slimmed down, we got what they called outsourced to a company called EXI, who basically just took various sections of the business that Ericsson's didn't want to keep within the framework of the Ericsson organisation. So they were virtually, I would call it, subcontractors. The job didn't change, the environment didn't change, the management changed slightly, but as the company shrank, the number of people who were competent enough to do certain parts of the job dwindled, and in the end you ended up doing jobs from Huddersfield to Guatemala, would you believe, Chile, all over Europe. All I can say really is it was a dream job. But like all dream jobs, they come to an end, and unfortunately EXI met a similar fate to Ferranti's, in that as the work slowed down, the money dried up, the competitiveness of the nature of the business was that there was maybe 2 or 3 companies do the same job, and they were probably marginally better positioned than EXI, and EXI is no longer. After that, I had various jobs that were, you know, nowhere near as good as that. When you look back at your time working, when I started at Ferranti as an apprentice at 16, I never would have believed that at some point in my life I'd be travelling the world doing a job. And when you've been in a factory environment for so long, you feel privileged, really, because if I would have stayed in Ferranti's, if they would have still, you know, I could have done all my working life there, which is not unusual, to be honest, in the Ferranti's. Ferranti's had a lot of what they call lifers. You know, some people I can remember started at 14, and not many, but retired at 65 and spent the whole of the working life in a factory environment, which in essence of job security and the fact that, you know, the limitations of what you could do and what abilities you had and the opportunities that came along was probably not too bad for people. I mean, you get people who've worked down mines all their lives and various other jobs where you're basically stuck in one environment, but just a lucky break and getting made redundant was like taking me into a different world. The recollections of factory life was routine. Everything was very, very, very routine. You clocked on, you got a break at a certain time, you had your dinner at a certain time, you had your afternoon break at a certain time, and then you clocked off at a certain time, which when you get outside of that environment, you don't believe how sort of regimented you were. But that was the way factory life was, and if you've never experienced anything different, I suppose that routine is the way that you feel comfortable. Because apart from a few people complaining about things, there's a lot of people, and the same for like Mather and Platt and aerospace. There was a lot of people who spent the majority of their working lives in one environment. And when you get out and you know, the first site survey I did was Shap in the Lake District. I couldn't believe that you just was going out to do a job in an environment like the Lake District, where my normal routine was I clocked on at 7:45. I did my work in the morning. You got told exactly what to do. You knew what you were doing all week because you knew what jobs were there and what jobs were coming in. You had a job card that you booked on. You had a time to do the job, which was piecework. And everything that revolved about money was about piecework. And you've seen violent arguments about times to do jobs. And people used to get, you know, what they used to call rate fixers were probably the most hated people you could possibly get in most jobs. There was always somebody throwing banging, shouting, chucking a card around, you know, because the times were obviously time set so the company could make money on the job, but it was very difficult to make a bonus if it was too tight. So, you know, there was that element of control and that element of when you went in the morning, you probably knew exactly what you were going to do for the rest of the month, because everything was repetitious in the fact that the same jobs came in cycles. And if you had a different job, which sometimes jobs came in from experimental and other departments were too busy, you know, it was like a bit of a novelty, to be honest with you. And I think, you know, people actually felt really good that they were doing something different or something that sort of enhanced the day. The other big thing about was a canteen facility where you could get a 3-course lunch for, you know, about 2 and 6 or whatever it was, that was subsidised by the company. You know, which all those things now, with all those what you could call a perk, there's nothing like that these days. Every place I've been into, apart from the odd BT building over the years, there's no food, there's no canteen, there's nothing really. But that was part and parcel of working in a factory. All the big factories had canteen, restaurant facilities. In fact, Ferranti's staff canteen was silver service, which, you know, even in this day and age, you know, you'd be hard stretched to find a company that would provide a silver service restaurant for any level of staff. Even maybe the managing director might get that, but certainly not down the ranks. I always look back at my dad's working life. He worked at what was the old Moston brick as a joiner. He spent a lot of his working life in a sort of semi-workshop factory environment. And as he worked his way up through the ranks in life, he eventually became a joinery manager for a company called Pellows in Oldham. And as he developed through his life, Pellows closed and he moved on and he bought a shop on Moston Lane. It was a hardware shop that used to be owned by a couple, it used to be Feinbergs. And that was sort of like taking him out of an environment, because he'd never been in retail, he'd never done any shop work. So he used to run the shop with my gran. He spent 20 odd years doing that before he retired. But that was when Moston Lane, or the Lane, was the place to go to shop. Most of the shops were, you know, owned. They weren't sort of franchises or anything like that. You had every type of shop you could think of along there. And of course, when Asda came along, the Lane suffered. So if the time was right, my dad moved on and he went to retirement in Fleetwood. So there was clothes shops on Moston Lane. People remember Parker's and places like that. There was a hen house, one of the first sort of chicken rotisserie places. There was still Gosling's. Gosling's fish shop was still there, and there was just like them. They had a market, an indoor market. You had still had a market at Harpurhey, which has managed to survive even with us because it's right next to it. My gran used to work at shops along the lane. She worked at the chemist down the bottom end of Harpurhey. Most people I knew worked locally. The big factories in the area and the Mather and Platts of this world, Ferranti's and British Aerospaces, must have employed about maybe 10,000 people. And the majority of them are probably within 10 miles of the site. Now there's nothing of those factories left at all, I don't think. I think Mather and Platt may still have a foundry somewhere, but they changed to wormholds, and obviously the companies that were household names at the time in this area. If you went in a pub, you'd bet your life 2 or 3 people worked at either of those factories. If you had any family, you had family members who probably worked at either of those factories. And it seems strange now that there's apart from what you could call historical records, and the people who work there who still have obviously memories of the same as I'm saying now, that they'll remember all these things, that you clocked on, you clocked off, you joined the union. There were closed shops, which I used to have to go and pay my union dues at the Moston Labour Club. No green card, you didn't work then. So that was another strange, when you come out of the union environment. I did have a short spell as a shop steward. The trade union movement within the factories was pretty much solid as a rock then. I think there was an underswell of people who didn't like closed shops, but the closed shop system worked because the qualifications people had to get the card guaranteed that you had served your time. So an apprentice who would have to do a 4-year apprentice and go through the apprentice ranks as a trade union member to get the green card, which was good for the employers in the way, because they knew if they were employing somebody and they had a green card, they'd done a full year apprenticeship. And obviously apprenticeships went to, one of the things that got cut over the Ferranti training school when I went into it had, there was about 120 people started in the actual training school. It was a city and guilds base, but you did what they call an ITB training, which was training on the job. So I got certificates to prove I'd done the training, the ITB training in the factory, and a city and guilds certificate to prove I'd done the college work, which, was a standard, really. It was a benchmark. I mean, I really don't know how they judge people's credentials these days, but certainly in the engineering environment, you could guarantee the guy probably stood next to you had done the same level of apprenticeships, which I think the companies, even though they weren't overly keen on unions, I'm pretty sure that the fact they could go out and employ anybody and virtually guarantee they could do the job probably made like a personnel officers, as they used to be called, life a lot easier. So, a questionable CV would probably have not got through in them days. Really, that's, in a nutshell, my sort of working life, and reminiscing about factory life. The one of the weird, strange things about factory life was nicknames. A guy who used to be very interested in birds, he was Dick the Wagger. And he was also the guy who used to work a lot of overtime, the vicar. There was all sorts of weird and wonderful names, and there was a guy, and they used to call him Big Bill, and his name was Eric. he just got a nickname of Big Bill. His name wasn't even Bill, but he just got and then everybody called him Big Bill. It was just a strange environment, really, but it was an environment that worked at the time. It's probably condemned to the past in a way, because I suppose in the world of modern technology, it would be considered archaic. I mean, one of the first actual exposures I had to technology before the zone phone, they had a machine for loading circuit boards, which were previously done by hand. It was incredible to watch it. It was just, the components came in at one end and the boards came out the other end loaded, went through a soldering machine and came out the other end, whereas prior to that, you'd maybe have 20 girls sat around benches soldering resistors and capacitors and transformers onto little circuit boards. So that was the first step into when I started to realise that technology was coming, and then the computerisation came in. We used to spend a lot of time in the drawing office on, getting drawings marked up and things changed, and we worked on quality for a while. When they got their first CAD machine, it was how many of these draftsmen can we get rid of, really, because this machine does the job for them. And it was just you could see in the early stages then where this was probably going to go, because most factory environments now that make circuit boards, I bet there's only about 10 people working them. Most of it's all automated. And that's when the first sort of exposure to automation came in. But there was always an element of manual side of jobs. When we worked at Ericsson's, they sent us out to learn about installation. It was nearly everything to do with the installation was physical. It was done by a person. The amount of time that they used to spend with cables, dragging cables around, running cables around. They did have a nickname. They used to call them cable monkeys. And they literally used to walk and pull cables for miles and miles all day. In a big exchange in Manchester, you might have 120, 130 metre cable run. So the actual, although the clever stuff's done on the computers, the actual putting it in was all down to manual work and the skill of the senior installer to set the exchange in the right position. So there was always going to be, obviously as fibre optic came in and other types of systems came in, the need for cables was you're still going to have them, but it was a bit of a weird, you see everything progressing forward, but then you go and see that there's certain things that machines can't do. So you get to sort of a point where, you design it on the computer, you produce your drawings on the CAD, you do your ordering on the computer, you send all your information out to BT by electronic mail or whatever. But when you actually see what you've designed, there's still 15 to 20 people involved in actually physically doing the work. Even though when you see the technological side of life and, the things you can do with communications now, an exchange is probably, a tenth of the size of what it was. But you still need the expertise of hands-on people to actually do things. And I think that's part of driven by when you learn a skill, even if you're a fitter, I was classed as a fitter wireman, you always do have an appreciation of the fact that working with your hands is a bit of a pleasurable occupation in a way, because you actually can create something. I think a lot of people now would benefit from having hands-on experience, because it's a pretty much dead trade now, to be honest with you. And like mining and like other things, it's never ever going to come back. So if somebody remembers, or this jogs anybody's memories, I'm sure everybody will have a story to tell at times in factories. One thing about it, that the people were really, you always met good people. They were always very friendly. There was always a good environment. That's the only thing I can say about most places I've worked. The companies might not be the best in the world, although I didn't experience any particularly bad companies. But the people who tended to work there, because of the camaraderie and the fact that you were with them in enclosed environments, like in clean air rooms in Ferranti's, you'd be sat next to the same people for 40 hours a week in the same environment. So, not everybody got on, but it sort of made you into a more, I think, a friendly type of person, because it was a friendly environment. I think you probably don't get that now so much. I've not worked in that type of environment for a long time, but looking at the way the world goes, I would have thought that you wouldn't get the same level of people who had to get on with people and I spent 5 years in one department with virtually the same people, because, like I say, the workforce didn't really change that much. You knew when you went in the morning who you'd be sat next to, you knew what you were doing. And I suppose that's a comfort in a way, because, nowadays, if those jobs were there now, you'd have a lot of kids who would probably have a more secure future, have a bit more, appreciation of life, and have more life skills. Because one thing it did teach you was life skills, how to get on with people, how to, just get up out in the morning, out of bed, and go do something for 8 hours a day. All these companies had social clubs, football teams, cricket teams. Ferranti's had a big social club, which is now Morrison's. There was a cricket pitch there, Lancashire Standard cricket pitch. The football pitch was there, but they didn't have a team. British Aerospace had the Lancaster Club. Mather and Platts had a pitch there, which was top class, that Oldham Athletic and other teams used to use for training facilities. The actual investment in sport and social life, with bowling clubs. I mean, there was all the infrastructure of your social and recreational life, if you worked at a factory, could be literally based around the fact that they provided these facilities. I played football in the Manchester League, and you went to places, pitches like Tootles, Mather and Platt, you had Ship Canal, you had all the big factories in the area had their own facilities, and they were full-time groundsmen, top facilities. Manchester League was one of the top leagues, and players could, develop into pretty good footballers because of the facilities. A lot of the players I played with in the Sunday leagues played on Saturday for the Manchester League teams. I go back to when my dad used to play on Newton Heath Loco. That and subsequent top-class pitches and, top-class local football teams has all but disappeared. And there doesn't seem to be any Sunday League open-age football now. It's all kids playing on 5G or 3G or whatever G they're up to now. Every pub had a team. The Thatched House, the Bluebell, the Gardeners, the Museum, the Mowers. This local area now, and that's only in a very small, maybe 5 mile square area, they all had one or maybe even two football teams in the Middleton League or the Blakely League. When we first started in the Blakely League, the guy who used to live at the back of us, Bertie Woods, he was chairman of the league, and he encouraged my dad to put a team in the league. And there was 6 divisions of 10 teams. And mainly pub teams, Blakely, Moston, possibly New Moston, pub teams, club teams, conservative clubs, liberal clubs, Labour clubs. It was like a badge of honour for you to have a really good football team. And, the players used to move from team to team, and when I played for the Thatched, most of the people who went in the Thatched, drunk in the Thatched, or, as the teams get better, you have to bring better players in, but most of I think every pub and club in Moston had a football team. They had a darts team, they played crib, bowls teams. There was I must say it was a pub culture as much more as it was most people's social life based around a pub was something to do with a sport. Even like the Thatched House, they had darts matches every Thursday, I think. There was 2 football teams run out of there. They had a bowls team. And, if you think of the number of people who that brought into the pub, besides the people who went in drinking, most of the pubs were thriving then. I mean, most of those pubs I've just mentioned, none of them are there now. Ben Briley's gone. There's the Bluebell and the Garners and the Mowers left on Moston Lane. All the rest have gone. So, what went with the pubs is, a lot of people's social lives and sporting lives. It was, it's a sad thing, really, because, when we used to live on Moston Lane, we overlooked Broadhurst playing field. And every Sunday morning, it was a pain in the ass because they used to park all over the place, the cars. But you could bet every pitch on Broadhurst, which were the worst football pitches you could ever play on. And again, if anybody remembers playing on Broadhurst, it was just like playing on mud. There were no drainage, they were up and down. But everybody used to get out of bed on a Sunday morning, no matter what they'd done the night before, and go and try and play football. So there must have been something in it. But I drive past Broadhurst now, and all I ever see is little mini football matches. And what's now FC, that used to be Ronald Johnson's playing fields, which was the only decent pitch of the whole lot between Broadhurst and Ronald Johnson's. It was the only pitch that was actually flat. that was the equivalent of Wembley to play on Ronald Johnson. But that's the way things are now, isn't it? I mean, I would never have believed that the Broadhurst would have a semi-professional football team on it and a stadium like that. No one ever envisaged the way that, I suppose the local area would go. But if it does something for the area, enhances kids' chances of, becoming a footballer of some form, some level, you need to have facilities. The facilities in this area have never been the greatest. You either played on Broadhurst, the Boggart Old Clough, or on shale pitches. A lot of people remember playing on Monsell Wreck and places like that, which were red shale, which is a legacy of probably the particular areas, Monsell, around that area, probably never got any investment, and there was no green area to put a football pitch, but there were cinder pitches. Broadhurst had a cinder pitch. You had Brendan Avenue, which our school played on, which was literally crushed cinders. Very poor. I don't think it was ever marked out, to be honest with you. It was just like it was literally like playing on a clag heap, but you played on it. Everybody played on it. If you had a fixed joint, you turned up and played, and nobody ever really moaned too much about it because you were just glad to get a game of football, really. Nowadays, you've got to have, £300 boots and a £200 tracksuit and, look the part. And, then it was just a case of you enjoyed the game. There was, and if you got a medal at the end of the season, you did very well out of it. But that's all you played for. And, you played with your mates, you went for the pint after with your mates, and, that was the way life was then. And there was probably 100 pubs in Manchester that had the same atmosphere, same camaraderie, and if you won something, you got a presentation at the end of the season at Bellevue, and you felt really proud that you'd done something. But like I said, that's long gone. All the pub leagues, as you used to call them, there was characters in that as well. There was some notorious teams in it. They didn't play football. Well, they could play football, but if you couldn't beat you with football, they sort of kick you off the park. New Cross Labour comes to mind, Green Dragon and teams like that. You never turned up against these teams with any chance of winning. And, well, that was the nature of football then. It was probably considered, and would be now considered now, it's to be a man's sport. And if you didn't want to get knocked about a bit, don't bother turning up to play it, So, but that was, part of growing up. I mean, it was most people of my age who played in or were involved in any type of sport around that time, it would be the same. You played on 10 Acre Lane, and it was all red shale, and yet next to it was Tootles, which was probably one of the best pitches in Manchester, which was privately owned and run by the Tootle Courtauld family and whatever. Who apparently donated Broaders Fields bequeathed Broaders Fields to the local community. But the generalisation of Sunday football was that you got up and played with your mates from the pub or the club or wherever, and you went out in the after, or you went out in the evening with them. We used to have a rivalry with the Whitegate, so we used to go in the Whitegate sometimes. The Broadway up this end had a reasonable football team, and I still see people around who played at the time. I still have associate with lads now who we played for what was Broaders, Celtic, then the Thatched House, and you played in that era, and you never thought them days would end. But obviously that style of living and that type of living, I wouldn't say it was anything to do with the quality of life, but it was just the way that the world changes, and people had an opportunity to play more sports. You were very limited to what you could play when I was younger, and as time went on, people started playing golf more, and squash and all these other sports came in, badminton even, five-a-side football, different ways of playing the game, seven-a-side. And it just, with the demise of the pubs, the virtual, what was to me, a sporting recreation just disappeared, and like I say, none of these things will ever come back. So if anybody wants to know what it was like, they need to speak to somebody who's probably 65 plus. But it was enjoyable. That's what, the enjoyment you got out of life. Everybody had a certain ability at certain sports or whatever, and football was the local one. And it was, I can only say it was, I really enjoyed it. And I feel people who can't experience it would probably feel that they may have missed out a little bit on life, but I doubt if anybody would really, in this day and age, play on Broaders Field in the height of winter when you're breaking the ice for the referee to allow you to play. And that is, I can get witnesses to that. And when they throw the ball up and it bounced, it didn't matter if it stuck in the mud. He could kick it 10 feet. That was it. We played in unbelievably horrendous conditions. Bone hard, frosty. They just wanted to play football. They just turned up and wanted to play football. You wouldn't entertain it now. kids now, they play. My brother-in-law runs a team called Northside, and they don't play on grass. He said he can't remember the last time sometimes they play on grass. Everything's 3G or 5G or whatever it is. And they play football to suit the ages of the kids, which is a good thing, because I've seen pitch games on Broaders where you've got kids playing on men's pitches, and the goalkeeper's about 4 foot, and the goals are 7 foot, 8 foot, and you can't miss, can you? It's one of the sort of things you literally can't miss. So, I mean, yeah, the development of skills and stuff, we never did any skill training at all. I mean, we just did fitness training in the gym and played football. The concept of, dribbling round poles and doing, drills, he would never have dreamed he would have got to that stage where kids are coached to that level, which is not a bad thing, because I've watched teams train, kids train, and the level of skill that they have is tremendous. The actual skill level, the physicality and the actual level of determination, maybe, and the fact that you'd play in anything and do anything probably wouldn't be there. But with a ball at the feet, I see kids who are, skill levels nowhere near what I could achieve. But it wasn't about being able to do this or being stood in the right place, or you run in here when he runs there, you run there. It was just all, everyone wanted to be Georgie Best and beat 10 people and knock the ball in the net, which they probably still do now, but that was only a pipe dream, because most players played within your capabilities, which was more, I would say, physical than skill. But when you look back, I mean, it was what it was at the time. Like anything that you discussed or talked about today, it was a point in time thing that you didn't see a go, but as the years sort of drift by, you just saw these things disappear, and you knew that there was no way that this type of industry, job, business, sport, whatever, socialisation was ever going to come back, and it's good to look back on it, to be honest with you. And one thing about memories are, if you've got any memories and you feel that what you have in your head is of some use or some interest to somebody, put it down before you forget it. Because at some point you're not going to be able to draw, certainly the finer points of what you've done. Because if people find things interesting, which, everybody likes a bit of nostalgia here and there, and everybody likes to probably understand what the families or the parents and grandparents and great-grandparents did, or a lot of people interested in family trees. Probably a good way to find out about it is discuss what they did when they were younger, what the jobs were, what the social life was. Because it's still, even though it's a generalisation, there's still a lot of personalisation in it. I mean, I'm reading a book now called The Moston Story, and my great-grandfather was the first sexton at Moston Cemetery. And he's in the book, which I hadn't seen until today, there's only ever been 3 sextons in Moston Cemetery. There was John Flannery, John Lavin, and Seamus Croken, who's a friend of my father-in-law's, or was. He passed away, Seamus. So they're the only 3 people who've actually held that position since the concept of St Joseph's Cemetery in Moston. And I only found that out for the fact I was reading something and saw it. So there are things out there that you might think you know a lot about things, but you really, until you go into them, you don't know. You know, and even looking at things like the schools in the area, you know, you remember the schools, Early Lane, Moston Lane, St Dunstan's, you know, the churches in the area. You know, if you don't have an interest in it, it's just an interest to go and look at it, because you will find something you don't know, and you will find something that will be of interest to you. You know, and if you can do it through whatever the modern media is now, YouTube, internet, whatever, it's probably a lot better and easier than trying to read it all. Is that enough, Cole?